So today we're talking with Jess Piper, a former candidate from Missouri and the founder of Blue Missouri. So, Jess, tell us something about yourself.
My name is Jess. I'm from the cornfields and bean fields of Northwest Missouri, population 480 people, right on the Iowa line. And I was a candidate in 2022. Before that, I was an English teacher for about 16 years. Things just started happening, and I started paying attention to politics and decided eventually that I needed to get into politics. And long story short, lost my butt on that in that race, but I learned a whole lot. And actually, I'm not the founder of Blue Missouri, but I am the executive director of Blue Missouri. It was started in 2017 by Michelle Hornish after being horrified with Trump's initial 2016 win. And so we have been an organization for almost a decade now, funding down ballot Democrats in Missouri.
And tell me, what do you find about the value of supporting down ballot candidates? Why that mission?
It's huge. I didn't know before I ran. I just assumed if you were a Republican or you're a Democrat, when you run for office, that the party supports you. And I found out real quick that's not at all how it works. And that in general, the party doesn't fund candidates, that they fund, the organization, the infrastructure, and that sort of thing. So I found out really quickly that I needed to raise money. And for me, it was pretty easy because I'm outspoken, because I can use social media. And so I was actually able to raise more money in my race than any other state ledge candidate in the entire state, which is crazy because I'm running in a district that hasn't elected a Democrat in 32 years, and a district that's never elected a woman. But through this experience, I found out that it's very difficult for people, usually in my space, in rural red spaces, to raise any money because, well, you can think of the DNC looking at a state like Missouri and saying, we don't really need to spend a lot of money there. They're red, right? What's the point? And then you look at a state party in Missouri who looks at a race like mine and says, hey, we don't really want to spend any money up there. There's no point. You're not going to flip this. And so it really came down to me realizing that there are 3 or 4, maybe 5 seats that are people consider flippable every year. And the rest just go unfunded or definitely underfunded. And I thought, well, who knows who's going to flip a seat? How would you know who could win when we're not contesting half the seats anyway? And how can you judge when, we don't have candidates in these spaces, and they're not in these spaces because they can't do the fundraising? So that got me to really thinking about the way we think about funding races.
Have you seen success in the idea that even though they lost the first time, you're building something in rural Missouri? And do they run again? Do they have any success there? Are you seeing anything measurable that shows that your approach is wiser than the Democratic parties?
Yeah, we're seeing people run over and over again. And I always just tell people who are running, I mean, we have to reassess what a win is. A win is having a candidate. A win is giving someone a choice. A win is, people being able to go to the ballot and actually see someone that could represent their values on the ballot. And so, like in my case, I got 25% of the vote, which seems like a gut punch. People are like, oh my gosh, you lost so badly. Yeah, but here's the thing, friends. We have left 25% of the voters on the table every single cycle. Every single cycle, we walk away and say, "Well, it's only 25%." Are you kidding me? 25% is a massive part of the vote. And even if you can't flip a seat, what are you doing? You're driving those votes to the top of the ticket. So you could elect, say, a Democratic governor. You could elect maybe a Democratic congressperson, even if those people that are running for state ledge and state senate don't flip seats. And by the way, how do you flip a seat that has been gone for 30 years? You have to claw your way back some way. And that's by having candidates on every single ballot, every single race, every single state, no seat uncontested.
And here in Iowa, we're seeing the same thing. If you just give up and don't contest it at all, in fact, a lot of Democrats will just stay home.
Yeah.
They don't see any reason to show up at all, and then you've lost them. And in terms of what you're hearing and seeing out in rural Missouri, is it in alignment with the way you see the Democratic Party approaching rural Missouri or rural America, or is there a disconnect there?
I think there has been a disconnect. And I know there's a lot of issues with Ken Martin right now with that autopsy that was released that was bad. And I listened to his interview on Pod Save America, and I thought, no, 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 this is not what we do when something terrible has happened. And this report didn't, ended up being a pile of flaming dog poop. Well, what you got to do is just admit to your problems and walk away from it, not double down and not do the things that he's done. But I will tell you that Ken really was following that 50 straight state strategy, that Howard Dean sort of implemented by sending money to state campaigns. Because before, like the DNC in Iowa, this, they're like, I'm not spending money in Iowa. There's no reason to spend money in Iowa. Well, of course there is. We know what Iowa used to be, and I know what Iowa is, and I know why Ann Seltzer, 2 years ago in that poll said, I think Iowa will flip. She was roasted and ran out of town for it. But here's the thing. I see what she saw, and you probably do too. I'm going to all these rural spaces. I went to a little town just north of me in Iowa called Nottoway, Iowa, and the population is 78 people. I spoke to a room of over 78 people. Right? People are showing up because they're sick and tired. And you know what's going on with your water quality, not only in Iowa, but in all these spaces, especially with data centers coming in. You know what's going on with farmers. You know what's going on with fertilizer. You know what's going on with defunding schools and sending our tax money to private religious schools that our kids don't have access to. People are furious. I attended a town hall 2 days ago in my own county with my representative and my state senator. And you'd think, because this is, a very red place, there were 100 people there. I had to park 3 blocks back in Maryville and walk in there, and it was packed. And I'm telling you, they weren't happy. There weren't people there, excited to hear what our representatives have been doing. They were angry. They were carrying, protest signs. And it's things that we haven't seen for a long time. But if we remember our roots, we remember who we are. Where do these progressives come from? From the prairies, from the farms. We knew what good government looked like, and we needed it, right? And I think people are starting to finally remember who they are and go back to their roots.
Yeah, we're seeing that here too. It's I feel like we're on the verge, but you never know until you're over the verge, right? But I feel like we're on the verge and we're giving people an opportunity to say, okay, maybe Trump wasn't the answer. You know, maybe we do share more values than we thought we did. But the forces are so strong against us, right? There's a rural urban divide, there's the right and left, there's so much to fuel either side, and people are making money off of that, right? There's advertising the money, and there's clicks, to get people riled up in their position. There's a lot less money bringing people together, and I wonder if the mainstream media is as guilty of that as anyone. Do you see the mainstream media covering this kind of nuanced change in rural America or not?
Not so much. And it's because they're not here. And they're not here because it's not engaging to a lot of people unless it's after an election and they're interviewing Trump voters at a diner, somewhere in our part of the world. And I'm like, you know what? Yeah, those people are here. But why aren't you interviewing the people who have been standing against this for an entire decade, who have been looking out for their neighbors while they're taking, hit after hit from their neighbors? Why aren't you covering these people who are standing for their community and with their community to do better? And so I do see media not reporting that. And I have a big audience on Substack. And I'll tell you why. It's not because, my writing skills are the best in the West. It's because people aren't hearing the stories of where we're from and who I'm talking to and the people in the room and what's going on the ground. And when they see that, when they hear that, it makes them, change their mind. And you talked about a rural urban divide. And here's what I want to tell you. If rural and urban people came together, because basically we're suffering from the same exact problems, we would be unstoppable. We both have defunded schools. We don't have sidewalks. We don't have access to medical care. We're in child care deserts. We're in food deserts. We're suffering from the same thing. It just looks a little different. And let's talk about gun violence. We have gun violence in rural spaces, don't we? But it comes with, people who are harming themselves at their own hands versus someone else harming them. But it all stems from, this overabundance of guns, everyone having access to guns. And trust me, I'm a gun owner. My entire inheritance from my dad was guns. So I'm not anti-gun, but this is problematic. And if we think about our problems that way, and how much we're more similar than different, we really can accomplish a lot.
Well, you talk about I'm a gun owner as well, and but you talk about guns turn on ourselves, and that speaks to the mental health crisis,
Yes.
which everyone is struggling with.
Yeah.
And just like poverty, it's easier to hide in rural America than in urban America, and because we blame it, we immediately put labels on what those people should look like,
Yeah.
and what they should be struggling with. Well, we're all struggling with the same thing. We're all struggling with lousy wages that haven't kept up in 50 years, no job security on the job, no voice, part-time gig work, no security, no hope for the future for the kids. And I'm with you. We have all of that in common across that divide, and yet we have people constantly, putting us in these buckets and keeping us apart. Um, so we surveyed readers at Barn Raiser a little while back, and we did identify the differences between urban and rural readers. And one thing we saw was that among among the rural readers, and I feel it myself, the fear of talking about their own politics, progressive politics in the rural area, is very high, and we feel it here too in Iowa. And they're much more concerned about Christian nationalism, about threats to democracy, about authoritarianism. Why? Because we're seeing it here. I'll tell you that here in East Central Iowa, rural Iowa, we did a No Kings rally, right? We had 50, 60 people in the county seat, and we posted a picture of that on the residents page of the Facebook, right? We got all kinds of hate, right, on the comments. But in Little Tipton, which probably isn't more than a couple thousand people, the likes and loves, the little icons, 1,400 likes and loves compared to 400 of the laughing and derision. We're out there as the point of the spear, but people are afraid. They're not going to come out to a rally, and I'm wondering, where you're seeing that, if you're seeing the same thing where you are.
Yeah. And what you did actually was make it easier for people to show up. You made it easier for people to see that there are people like you and like them that are standing on the corners against authoritarianism, against Christian nationalism. So, absolutely, I see that. I go down and protest all the time with a group called Persisterhood in St. Joe, Missouri. It's about an hour south of me. And when they first started showing up, there were 10 or 15 people, and then there were 200. And their last No Kings, there were almost 1,000 people there in St. Joe, Missouri. I got to tell you, I mean, I've stood with them. There are people, I mean, there are people driving by in, big diesels, rolling coal the whole time, screaming, yelling, doing whatever. And it gets bigger and bigger because
Mm-hmm.
people realize I'm not by myself. And that's why when you hear Democratic strategists and people always, and I heard this when I was running, don't worry about signs. You do not need to buy signs. It's a waste of money. Signs don't vote. No, you need signs, especially in places like this, because no, the signs don't vote, but the people who drive by my little farm and see that it's okay to be pro-choice, pro-education, pro-democracy, anti, Christian nationalism, anti-authoritarianism, they know it's okay and they feel okay in this space. And that's how we bring in our community. I would knock on doors and people would come to the door and they'd say, well, I'm a Democrat, but I'm the only one. And I'm like, friend, I just knocked a door 2 doors down, right? But they didn't even know because they're both scared. And
Yep.
I'll give you a little bit of hope of how things are changing because 4 years ago, when I first started speaking, I didn't mean to do this for a living at all. It's just that there was no one in the space. There's no one talking to rural progressives, rural Democrats. So I was asked to go to Cameron, Missouri, which is a town about 8,000 in the mid part of the state, and I meet with about 12 people, and they met in the church basement because they were scared. They didn't even park their cars out in front, right? They were parked all over the square. And so I met with them about some things that were going on with book bans and that sort of thing. And 12 people 4 years ago. I just went less than a month ago, and there were so many people in this room that it was standing room only. There was over 100 people in that same little town 4 years later that are showing up for a random rally to meet candidates. And by the way, they have candidates to vote for. There are people on the ballot. So that has changed. And I'll tell you, when I ran in 22, 40% of the seats in Missouri were uncontested. This year, 2%.
Sweet.
It takes time, and there's no quick way around this. We didn't lose our democracy overnight, and we're not coming back overnight, but it's worth the fight. It's worth the money. It's worth the work.
if we're willing to put up the courage that it takes to get out there and do this on the ground, you would think that somebody would figure out that was worth something,
Yeah.
So, and I tell the folks I work with, this is about courage. Don't diminish the fact that it took courage to go to your first county supervisors meeting with all Republican men
Yeah.
in charge who've been meeting there for 15 years by themselves,
Yeah.
and passing laws and rules and ordinances that no one, if anyone was watching, would allow.
Right.
And they're not used to the word courage. Rural people are not used to talking about being brave just to be in front of their neighbors.
Yeah.
But that's where we're at now. Like you said, with the trucks rolling by and the guns hanging out and the BS on the comments on the pictures and things. But we have to do it. Somebody has to do it, right? But
That's
it's
right.
nice to know that we see growth, right? It's nice to see the progress. We don't always see it here, but I've been watching you and reading your stuff for long enough, and I love these stories of how you go back in a few years and there's so many more people. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Tell me, what was your worst day? What was the worst day you had doing all this, whether it was running for office or just doing the Blue Missouri work or in your public speaking?
Probably the worst day was my husband losing his job because I was
Mhm.
running for office. So we were both teachers. We worked at the same school, and I was tenured and he was not. And I was the only member of NEA in the entire building. Everybody else was MSTA, which is not a union. It's like a teachers organization. But that's what rural people think is a union a lot of times until they find out that it's not. But so we were going back after COVID with no mitigations, face to face in August, and NEA protested down in Kansas City, and I went down there and ended up being on the nightly news. And my superintendent saw me protesting, and she knew that I had filed to run for office. And 2 days later, they called my husband and told him his services were no longer needed, which they could do because he was an at-will employee, and this is Missouri. Um, and that was a really dark time because I realized I'm used to getting flack. I'm used to people saying terrible, awful things to me. It is what it is. But when it reaches into your family, and that was his career. And so it was very problematic. And he did end up getting another teaching job. He's actually a head football coach, and he's tenured. So now I'm a little louder, right? But people ask me all the time, are you going to run for office again? And I've always told him after that happened, I said, I'll wait until you retire because it's not fair. It's not fair to my kids. It's not fair to my grandkids for them to have to pay. And that's another thing that people need to understand when they're like, well, why don't these rural folks run? Why aren't they running for? Well, you can very well lose your livelihood, your spouse, your children could lose their friends. You could lose your church home. You could lose your family members, your community and your friends. That's what happens when you stand up for what's right in a place that hasn't been standing up for a long time.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was definitely the darkest time.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear it. I can speak to the fear, though. I helped run a campaign against a major Republican in the state house here, and his daddy's the head of the GOP, and he's a very vindictive man. I've known him for years, and he takes everything personally if you don't disagree, if you don't agree with him. And after we lost that campaign, I bought a new gun and I bought security cameras because we're out here all by ourselves,
Right.
and there's absolutely nothing stopping not him but his MAGA friends
Right.
from coming out and scaring the bejesus out of us. And I'm not sure that people who don't live in rural areas don't get that.
Right.
I really don't get it. And the other one you were talking about, the doors, and we distributed literature to every door in the small towns, and I'd always knock and drop. And we had a lady, the older gal answered. She was registered Republican on our list, and she answered, she said, "Oh, I love you guys." I'm like,
Oh.
well, you're a Republican. Oh no, I just do that so the neighbors stay off my back. He's a Democrat. so
Right.
so they're hiding in plain sight. And if we don't get out and talk to them, we'll never know. And they
Right.
won't know that we're here, right? So, Jess, at Barn Raiser, we cover Christian nationalism and the role it's playing in the world, in the nation's politics. What are you seeing about how people of faith are addressing these issues in your neck of the woods?
Well, honestly, I'm a little disappointed in my the faith I was born and raised in, which was being a Southern Baptist. I'm disappointed in evangelicalism in general and the way that they 80% supported Trump, who is very clearly not at all a man of faith or of the Bible. Um, but it is a huge thing, and what happened in rural spaces is rural Democrats used to come together and, be around each other in union halls, at church, at school, at events in town. And then as our, culture and everything changed, people aren't doing those things as much anymore. But you can bet that 3 times a week, Christians are going to church. And in some Christian churches, 3 times a week, they hear things like, you can't vote for a Democrat and be a Christian. And how do I know that? Because Susan and I heard it at a door over and over and over again. I would knock, we would talk about schools and roads and hospitals and libraries and all the things that were important. And before, they would leave the door, they'd say, well, are you a Republican or a Democrat? And I'd say, I'm a Democrat. And they'd say, oh, I can't vote for you because I'm a Christian, which is just, the first time I heard it, I didn't know what to do with myself. And, by you hear it a dozen or 20 times, you're like, well, this is what it is. And that's why we need to be in these areas. But I always want to remind people the Christianity I grew up with is not what I'm looking at now. This is Christian nationalism, which is totally different. This weird patriotism, this weird, Jesus and John Wayne stuff, like the book. It's this masculinity thing that's going on in these communities. And a lot of these folks I know, because I've known a lot of people for a long time, they weren't Christians. They didn't go to church. It's like Trump has become their church. They have literal altars. I have a family member that has this little shelf with all this MAGA gear on it. And I was like, that's an altar, right? I mean, they make golden statues of him. Literally there was a golden calf in the Old Testament. And you're like, what are you doing? And so a lot of times it's people who don't understand their faith, but then they're caught up in this faux faith that's really not about Christianity at all. It's about what the Republicans started in the 1980s with Ronald Reagan and wedge issues that have finally permeated all the way to where we have Trump.
Exactly. And we see, I was going to say this started before the 80s, but we saw it happening in the 80s with the Christian right, which was really more aligned with business interests than anything else. But they bring these working class people along with them. I don't know. It's magical when it comes to propaganda, how they pull this off. Right. It really is, and I think that there's probably something to learn from that, and how they do that. Not that we want to do it, but they are definitely weaponizing Christianity, and the right has been doing that now for decades, and it's been about a 70-year campaign in response to the 60s. And I think I'm hoping we're seeing it at its peak, because it's time for us to reclaim the teachings of Jesus or Muhammad or the Talmud, you name it. But there's Christianity, religion was usually meant to be a kind thing, a loving thing, right? With a loving God. And we're not seeing that in these personifications in politics. Why don't we wrap it up with something that really gives you already spoke a little bit about it, but something that really gives you hope for the future, either for the midterms coming up or kind of the way things are trending. What's something you can really hang on to when you get out of bed in the morning?
Well, obviously, it's more and more people showing up and listening to what's going on. With my Substack, I'm reaching people. A lot of my readers, frankly, are people that live on the coast, people that live in cities that are fascinated to find out that we exist. And by the way, we're not even unicorns. There's quite a few of us. So that's always hopeful. It's the young people that I see showing up now. There's a data center that's proposed. They say it's proposed, but it's already named. So I was like, wait a minute. You named a data center that's just proposed, and you guys have been talking about it for years, and we found out about it last week, right? Which, by the way, if people want to know, if there are a couple things that are absolutely nonpartisan every single time, that's a data center and school funding, right? Mm-hmm. But these data centers are enraging everyone. No, I have not spoken to an actual human who is like, yeah, I think this is a great idea, except for a developer or a landowner who may be selling their land, or a county commissioner who signed an NDA for some reason, right? So seeing these issues coming forth and seeing the anger at the regime, at what's going on, at the Iran war. I mean, I'm a military mom. When When I saw that Trump was trying to raise money off 13 dead soldiers, 6 or 7 from Iowa, I I lost it. I didn't know what to do anymore. And so when I go and speak to people, I'm like, even Republican, can you believe he would do this? I'm from MAGA family. My mom and dad were MAGA, my sister, they're all MAGA. And do you think this is okay? No, I don't. Do you think that Jesus meme was okay? Because you're all religious, right? No, I don't. All right. We've got to do better. We can't do this anymore, which, friend, is not so much hopeful, but something that we're all fighting against is redistricting and these gerrymandered maps. But that's the only way they can win. I'm telling you, they cannot win if they don't cheat, because I'm on the ground. I see what's going on. So if we can beat these maps, if we can tell people, you can beat a gerrymander, by the way. Look at Sharice Davids over in Kansas. All you got to do is vote for the Democrat. I mean, you can put me in whatever district you want, but I'm not voting for you, right? So just remind people, they are trying to lessen, the votes of our Black communities. But wherever you are, vote against the people that are harming you. And this gets better. It doesn't go away. We've got to fight this for a while, but it gets better.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we have to do when we're in the middle of it. We just have to remember it does get better. But if we don't do anything, we know exactly what happens.
Right. Right.
So, well, I want you to tell everyone the name of your Substack, because I love it myself.
It's The View from Rural Missouri. And you can go to Substack. I also always post it on Facebook as well. And I have, an account there and Instagram and all the places. And then if I can, I'm the executive director of Blue Missouri, and you can go there and find out what we do. We do everything differently than most people who work on flippable races, or, I've heard people say, Susan, this is awful. I've heard people say, we invest in the races that matter. And I'm like, wait, that means a lot of races don't matter.
Right.
No, don't say that. So you know what we do? We invest in the bottom up. So we created a funding floor in 2024 where no state rep in Missouri had less than $7,000, which you're like, wait, did they win? They didn't, but they gained, some of them, 15 points, right? 15 points. What can you do with that the next time it comes around? And by the way, maybe we didn't flip a seat, but you know what we did? We overturned an abortion ban. We raised the minimum wage. We gave people sick time that, by the way, they undid with the vote. But the point of the matter is, getting people to the ballot makes things better. And that's what happens when you fund every single race.
It tells the guys in power that we're watching. We can actually mobilize, and we are watching you. You're not just going to be able to do whatever you want for your buddies. No, I understand. No, that's fantastic, and I agree. And I have to say, I take issue with the Democratic Party and others who say in rural America we just need to lose a little less worse, because I don't find that a very good rallying cry. So while it may be true, I'm convinced that those of us in rural America are actually fighting to win.
Right.
Might take more than one race, but we're going to win,
I'm married to a football coach, and I cannot imagine him ever saying, I want to lose less or whatever.
Right. It's worse. Right.
No, he's like, I want to win. I want to win every single time. I want to win. And if that's how we go into it, not thinking we're going to lose, but thinking this could be massive. And knowing whenever I was running, I mean, like I said, we hadn't elected Democrat in 32 years. I thought, if I win, I'll be on the front page of the New York Times, right? That's how you have to address it and think, this could be the biggest thing since sliced bread, and just go for it.
Yeah. And you have to define your own victories too.
Yeah.
Like you said, 15% here, 25% there. You're building a movement. You're bringing people together who've never been together before. They feel less alone. These are all victories. These are all things that get us where we need to go, right?
Yep.
Lastly, I'd like to ask you if you have any advice for other organizers. You've been in the trenches now for a while, and you've probably seen it all in rural America. And so, do you have some advice for organizers getting out there in rural America now, how they could be effective, how they can take care of themselves, what kind of conversations should they be having, that kind of things? Do you have anything for us there?
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of people, a lot of different organizations leaning into being in communities and doing like community service and that sort of thing. And I feel a certain way about that, because while I'm like, we are doing community service anyway, but I don't feel like we're going to change a whole lot of minds by people like walking dogs with our Democrat shirt on, right? Or picking up trash on the side of the road. By the way, I'm a Nottoway County Democrat, right? I think it's truly being there, being in your community. I am where I am. I live where I live. People know where I live and they know who I am because they can see my signs, right? And I'm still part of the community. And a couple years ago, I like to tell a story that we had a couple of cows that got out. We had this insane bull, right? And so it got out. And we come home, and our neighbors, who are flag waving Trump folks, have the cows in their pen, right? Because they're still my neighbor. They're still my neighbor.
Sure.
And so when we're in our communities, people recognize us as not, we don't have horns, we're not eating babies. Like, whatever you've heard is stupid, right? I don't even have blue hair, right? Like, you being in those places. And that's why I say run every race, run for county commission, run for the city council, run for school board, and then run for the things that are going to make a big difference in your state. And all politics is local. And so really being within a community makes a huge difference for organizers. And if that's not you, if you're new to a community, find the person that has been there forever. In all of these places, Iowa is way better equipped with county clubs and local Democratic, communities. But in Missouri, they've been broken for so long that a lot of these counties don't have anybody working. But you do. It's just that they've been gone for a while. I met with the club the other day, and they hadn't been together since 2017. They came back together and had over 100 people. People want to belong and want, to be able to talk with others who are like-minded. They're there. Find those people and then fan out into your communities. I'm not going to church anymore, but all the ladies I hang out with at Persisterhood are, right? And so we each have our own thing. I know a lot about education. They know a lot about, healthcare or roads or infrastructure, all those things. So it's coming together with the people that have been there for a long time and really working.
I see that here. I don't know how it is where you live, but 82% of the people in our house district commute out of the district to work.
Yeah.
There's no jobs in rural America to speak of.
Right.
And so when they think of community, they actually just think of going to work,
Right.
spending their money in Iowa City or Davenport or Muscatine instead of in the community. If we have to, we go to the county seat to deal with government business, hit the Walmart, and we're gone, right? And it's been a real challenge just to get people to think in those terms again. To say, no, wait a minute, go to the ball game, go, join the Lions Club, get involved in the downtown parades, get to know your local shopkeepers again, because we've become this commuting community, this commuting culture. And it feels like that was part of what broke up these rural communities, aside from corporate ag and all these other things. But, when you say to organizers, get involved in your community, do you see a challenge there? I mean, that they don't even know people, a mile away down the road,
Oh, yeah. I mean, it happens all the time. And you just mentioned a big part of that, Walmart, right? Which, guilty, I've got to shop at Walmart. That's where I have to do my grocery shopping. But my town, that's 480 people, used to be 2,000 people long time ago. There used to be a bank, 2 grocery stores. There was a farm implement. There was, a Ford dealership. And now we don't put up buildings, we knock them down. There's a bar that's open 3 days a week, and there's a convenience store and a couple places where you can buy a vape, right?
Yeah.
But that's it. So that community is gone. And that's where it is difficult for Democrats, especially folks who aren't attending church, to find community within rural spaces. And it is so nice if you do have shopkeepers, if you do have a downtown, please protect it at all costs, right? Otherwise, you're like me, driving 30 minutes for a gallon of milk.
Yep. So we got to face the challenges. We got to be unafraid of walking up to people's doors and knocking on them and saying, "Hi, I'm your neighbor."
Mm-hmm.
And what I've learned is it's not a bad thing to owe your neighbors a favor.
Yeah.
To say, "Hey, I could really use your help," and let them know you'll be there when you need them. And I think a lot of people who move out to the country, they don't think like that. They still kind of have this suburban mentality, and everybody has to have their own lawnmower and their own snowblower and everything else. So. But I think what I hear from you is that it is a challenge, and it's a challenge because of the changing economy and how we're all so separated. So thank you for inspiring us and giving us ideas for how we can bring people back together again and not be afraid of doing so. Because I know we're out here,
Absolutely.
right? We're out here.
We are. That's what I always say. Real Democrats are here. We've always been here, right? And
Yeah.
I appreciate you, Susan, and what you guys are doing at Barn Raiser and all the work you're doing in general.
Thank you so much. I
Yep.
appreciate it. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time. I am thrilled to talk with you today because I've just adored you from afar, from the north, for a long time. And if anyone hasn't seen Jess's Substack, you also have to catch her when she's almost always in her car doing the video, the reel, and it's always righteous and great. And she nails it every time. She's in her car. I just talked to these people, and I'm going to tell you what's up. And you just got to catch them because we don't have enough in the world these days that make us smile and give us joy and make us feel empowered. But I feel like you and all of us doing this work in the progressive space of news and making sure everyone's voices are heard, it's really, really absolutely critical. We need to feed our souls, or we'll just give up. And that's exactly what they want us to do. So,
It
so
is.
thank
Well,
you
I
so much.
appreciate you, Susan. Thanks for doing all the work.